Welcome. Today we'll be creating an app that calculates what is percent of. Here's the template that I've set up for you, but we'll be starting this fresh. You're welcome to start with the template, or you can follow along with this video to create the template itself. Before we create our project, let's look through the template, beginning in the body section of our HTML code. This line here, dealing with the inside of the h1 tag, you are welcome to change to reflect the application's title. So for this application, I guess I'll just take this, copy it, and paste it here. Just get rid of all that. We want to make sure that we do not remove the h1 tags. If we were to save our application at this moment and then open it in the browser by right-clicking and choosing Open in Browser, this is what we'd see. Here is the h1 tag now in effect. Here's the title tag in effect. This is the text. Here's a paragraph. Here's two inputs and the button. Let's go ahead and create this from scratch. We'll do this by going to File, New File. As soon as we've got our new file, we're going to do a File, Save As. We'll save this to the desktop for now. Because this file will not include any images, it's okay to just save the file outside of a folder. If we were to include images, it would be proper to create a new folder, name the folder, and then save this file within that folder along with the images that go along with the HTML. But since we have no images, let's just save this as percentage of dot. Remember to include the file extension HTML and click OK. Now on line 1, we'll use our autocomplete option. We'll begin by using the less than sign, the symbol to the right of the M, and we'll type HTML. We'll hit enter to autocomplete. Alright, let's start with giving our application a title. What is blank percent of question? Oops, let's put the question next to the of. There we go. Let's also copy this since we will be using this again. Okay, that takes care of the title. Now in the body section, let's go ahead and create the h1 tag, less than sign, lowercase h, 1, enter to autocomplete. You're automatically placed into the inner HTML of the tag, which is great. We can just paste. And I use the hotkey Control V to paste. The next thing we need to do is create a paragraph to let the user know what they should be putting in. This application will take in the percent and of outputting the, sorry about my spelling, the in is, period. Perfect. Now let's write that again so they can see this with the input tags, or the input tags in effect. Okay, so we'll do this. We'll at least paste that. Okay, this will just look like text. In fact, let's look at this so far. We'll do a File, Save As. So far we have our h1 tag, we have a paragraph, and then we just have some floating text out here. The reason why we didn't include this in the paragraph is because this is not necessarily, there's not enough characters to have a paragraph for this. It's just going to stay out there floating. We'll right click, we'll choose Open in Browser, we'll check it out in the browser. This application will take an effect is take in the percent and of, outputting the is. Okay, perfect. What is percent of? Now we're going to put the input box, an input box, a button, and then a blank box here, or a div box that will be used to display the output or the results. Okay, so input, actually, you know what, so that this jumps a line, because right now if we were to put this, it would just add it right next to here. In fact, I'll show you that. Input the percent. If we were to do this and save, okay, it does look like it's on two lines here, but it just keeps it on the same line because it just considers it as part of this content. So in order to break that, what we want to do is use a break tag, and that will make this next line jump to the next content after the break tag jump to the next line. So right here after what is percent of, let's do a BR, enter, okay, the break tag. It has no closing tag, it's just an open tag. We'll hit save. Let's check out our results. Okay, you see that it's like immediately on the next line. It's not really giving it a little bit any space. So let's add another break tag. There. And I just copied and pasted right after. Save, enter, perfect. Input the percent. So we're going to put a text box here, and then we'll do two more break tags, so we can do the same thing down here with another text box. Two more break tags, a button, two more break tags, a div box, and then we'll begin scripting. So here we go. This is the tag. The tag we'll be using is the input tag. Okay, input. Now remember, I'm using the autocomplete. It looks like I'm doing that fairly quickly. That's because I'm using the autocomplete feature. Let me go through that again. Less than sign, INP. You can see that it immediately focuses on the input tag. That's the one I want to use, so I'll hit enter to accept. And now I just need to change a couple of things. I don't want to use the name. I like using IDs. And the type is going to be of, you can either choose number, or I just like using the text box. Just makes things easier. The ID is something that we want to apply when we want to be able to connect with this object in either JavaScript or in the CSS, where you would basically design its coloring and its look. Okay, but the ID is important in order for you to communicate with this element outside of the HTML part of the script. So let's go ahead and add an ID, and this ID has to be unique. You can only use one ID per element. Well, not one ID per element. Each element has to have its own unique ID, meaning you can't have two elements with the same ID. You want to use a class when you have that situation. You want to have multiple elements that have the same set of rules, or you want to apply the same type of code to that group. You would use a class. But we're not doing a group thing, we're doing an individual thing. We're pulling information from an individual item, or we're styling an individual item specifically. So we're going to type an ID. We're going to give it an ID. An ID we're going to give this is the percent. Okay? You can make it whatever name you want, but you need to make sure that you use this name when referencing this box. Okay, so input the percent. Let's go ahead and do our break tag and another break tag, so that this next input box, which I'll just basically copy this information here, this next input box will jump onto the next line, like so. Okay, so this is the of. Okay, input type text, ID is going to be of. Remember, each one of these elements needs to have a unique ID. Okay, then we need a button. This is the button tag, less than sign, BUTTON. It's focused, hit enter, and the button works like this. You need to place into the inner HTML the name of the button, or which text you want to appear in between the button itself. I'll put submit, makes it easy. And then the buttons in the opening tag button attribute that we want to use is the on click. Okay, the on click. And what I did was I went into the, let me just undo this. Submit. submit. I went into the opening tag, basically placing my cursor after the N. I hit space to give myself some space between the N and the closing of the opening tag, and then I add the tag attribute, this one being the on click. Okay, and of course, on click. If you don't see the pop-up box, the help box, give yourself a little bit of space in between. Sometimes it works. Oh, you know why it's not working? Because I did that. On, there it goes. Click. Perfect. Okay, let's put that back. We really need the space. Problem was we had an extra N. Alright, so let's give this a name. So when we click on the button, we're going to be running a function. So we need to type the name of the function we want to execute. Remember, functions are basically kind of like CSS styles, but in the context of like dynamic things, like affecting a object's position, or maybe manipulating or calculating values, or displaying stuff. That's what the function uses. It does things dynamically, where CSS applies design to these elements. The function that we're going to run is basically going to take these values, run a calculation, and then output these values to our div box. So let's call this function calculate, calc for short. Remember, you can make up the name of the function, but you must include parentheses. We're not feeding any values into the parentheses, but they still need to be included. Okay, so when we click on the button, we're going to run the calc function, which is basically going to take the inputs and display them. So the last thing we need to do is create an area div for the display. You don't need to put anything into the inner HTML, but we do need to give this an ID so we can communicate with it through our JavaScript. And the ID is going to be output. All right, that sets up the HTML side of the thing. Let's go ahead and look at this. Oh, one more thing. After the submit, we want to put in 2 break tags so that the output box is on its own line. Of course, actually, no, that's not necessary. I believe because the div will stretch out. We can test. Let's just put something in here. I believe because the div is its own block element, it's just going to jump onto another line itself. So I'm going to remove these break tags. Let's do a little bit of a test here to test the theory of the div. The div is basically going to take up a whole line, and I believe that because the button is taking up partial that space, yep, see, jumps right to its own space. So that's fine. We don't even need the break tags. We're done here. Remove the break tags. If you want, because it did look like it was like right under there, we could do the 1 break tag just to give it some space. So, there we go. Save. We can open a browser. I'll just go over here and just refresh this. That's a little bit better. Okay, so let's close that. It didn't really do much. Let's do another break tag. Jump at another line. Because the first one is going to skip it a line, but it didn't really look like it skipped. Let's open this up. Again, this is completely optional. This is more aesthetic-wise. See, that's a little bit too far. I think I'm going to go back to 1. That looks weird. We'll go back to 1. There we go. Yeah, that's fine. Alright, now let's start working on the scripting. So after the div, we need to create another tag. Now I skipped a line because I like to separate the HTML from the scripting section, so I skipped the line for that reason. I'm going to start my tag by the less-than sign, just like all the other tags. We're going to type script. We're going to autocomplete by hitting enter when script is highlighted, and there we go. Script type text JavaScript. There it is. Now we write our script in between the inner HTML of the tag, so we need to give ourselves some space. Perfect. And the first thing we want to declare is the function, because basically when we click the button, we want to pull this data. Okay, we don't need to pull the data before because the user hasn't done anything yet. We want to pull the data after the user has inputted the data. So that's why we don't use the global just yet. We want to actually just implement it here in the function. Or sorry, global, we're going to create the function first and then implement it in there. So we begin by declaring the word, or declaring a function with the word function. Pretty simple. Then we tell the computer what function we're writing for, which is the calculate, calc. And we do the percent or parentheses, perfect. And then following after the parentheses, we need to block off this function so that the function knows what lines of code belong to the function. We do that by using brackets. We separate these brackets, and in between the bracket separation is where we place our code. The code will belong to the function as long as it's in between the brackets. That's what we want. We want the code to reside in the function because when the function runs, we want the code to run within it. Alright, so let's start by declaring some variables. We need a variable for the box that's for the percent. So we'll call this percent input. That will be fine. Remember, this name can be whatever you want, whatever appeals to you. However, I suggest that you make it something that you can kind of recognize, or don't just give it an arbitrary name. Make sure that it is kind of relevant to what the information is contained or data it's being processed in it. So we're going to use the method to basically take whatever is in this box and assign it to this variable. Okay, and the method we use is called the document. Okay, we're looking at the document, and then we want to get element by ID. It's the most commonly used way of grabbing and connecting with an element on your document. Inside of the parentheses, in quotes, we tell the document which ID we want to connect with, this being this ID. Now, this is why you have to use these IDs, or you need to use the IDs as they are written in order for the computer to understand which element you're trying to connect to. It's like trying to, it's like using a phone. You have to type in the right phone number in order for you to communicate with the person you're trying to call. If you input the wrong number, the wrong area code, it's not going to make the phone call to the person you're trying to communicate with. Same concept here. This is trying to communicate with this ID, therefore you can't have a lowercase p, can't forget the C, you can't spell it in any other way other than the way that you want to, only other than the way that it's supposed to be written here, in order for you to communicate with it. Okay, with that being said, we can just copy this whole line and change some of the elements for the second box. This is going to be the is input. So I'll just change the name to is input. And this is the, of input. So we'll change this to of input. And we're getting the of ID. Okay, next we need the variable for the output. I'll do the same thing, just paste, and we'll say output. It's going to equal document.getElement by ID and output. Now, I don't normally like using the same variable names spelling as I do with the ID, so I'll just change that to a capital just to distinguish the difference of the two. Alright, we need to create a variable for the answer. Now, basically, the answer will be a calculation of the percent input, which is the text box up here. More specifically, its value times the of input value divided by 100. That will give us our is. In fact, why don't we say variable is going to be equal to percentage input, or percent input dot value, times, just like we had described, the of input dot value divided by 100. Now, to see this, we need to access the output inner HTML and display it. We'll do this by addressing the output, more specifically the inner HTML, which is this area in between the opening tag, and the closing tag. We're going to make that equal to a string of text. We'll say the answer, let's do it. The answer is, and then equals, and then to add to the string of text, we're going to use plus, and then we're going to input the variable is, which was basically the value calculation of these two divided by 100. Let's save our app and test it. If everything checks out, we should see or pull in the percent input value, the of input value, and then from the outputs inner HTML see in a string of text plus the answer. So, what is 15% of 65? Submit. The answer is 9.75. So we could say this value is 15% of 65. How would we write this in the div here? We could say this value, so is, plus some string of text. Remember, to write strings of text, you must use quotes. Is, oops, inside of the quotes, Mr. Carew, is, with the space, so that we have a space between the variable and the string of text, is, space again, add the plus, let's put in the percent input copy, dot value, so we're saying whatever this number is, 15 is whatever percent of, so space, space plus some string of text of, and let's do one more plus, and let's add that last of input. This is more for aesthetics. You didn't have to do this. You could have just ended at the last line. It would not have changed the calculation. All we're doing is just making it output in a sentence. Alright, now we can do another plus, and let's just end this with a period. Remember, the period must be done inside of quotes because it is a piece, it is a string. We'll save it, not a piece of string, it is string. We'll come back in here, let's do what is 25% of 80. 20 is 25% of, object, let's see. This error is because we're not using dot value. Add the dot value so it knows exactly what part or what data to pull from that element. That's basically what this is saying. Get the, I don't know what element you want or what piece of data you want from this element. So let's do that again. What is 25% of 80? Submit. 20 is 25% of 80. Excellent.